All right, it's recording. You can start whenever.
Welcome back, Intrepid Impact listeners. If you hadn't tuned in until just now, we're here at the ESPN Richmond Radio 106.1 Intrepid Impact Leadership Broadcast. And this is 6:30 every Monday morning. So every Monday morning, you can catch us here, 106.1 ESPN Richmond Radio. If you missed the first half of the show, we did a recap of the 5 voices. And when we're talking about leadership voices, we are attempting to understand how others communicate. Why on earth is this important? Because if we understand how others communicate and we understand how we communicate, then maybe we won't be so freaking confused all the time. Think about how many meetings you sat in and you don't have a clue what the boss just said. Well, in fact, if that boss's first voice is the voice we're talking about today, and that's the creative, which is very future oriented, all about innovation. So it could be innovation of the team. It could be, hey, how is this group of people going to do amazing things for whatever cause we support in the future? Also, it could be an amazing future-oriented person that looks at, hey, how is this technology going to be used in the future? What technology is coming around the bend here? So creative voices are very future-oriented. Well, how does this relate to team meetings? Well, if the leader's a creative voice and he doesn't know it, we call that accidental creative. The accidental creative speaks future and thinks everybody else should get it too. In fact, only 9% of the population speaks future like the creative. And so when they're unaware, we call them the accidental creative. Now, a couple of things about the accidental creative. If you didn't catch the last show, this is what you can look out for. The accidental creative might fail to communicate in a way that other voices can understand and wonder why no one is listening to what they said. Another thing we talked about was they have perfectionist tendencies. Remember, in their head, it's great, it's perfect, it's a wonderful vision of the future. Well, because of that, they have an inability to celebrate wins if they didn't reach 100%. Now, you know that we never hit 100% because we have all kinds of constraints in reality that don't exist in our minds. Right? So when they get in their little mode there, in their accidental creative is what we call that, then they forget to celebrate the 80%. Well, remember when we talked about performance? Beginning of the show, we said teams on average function at a 58. Right. Teams on average fail, according to grammar school. Well, the creative might forget, the accidental creative might forget to celebrate that 80 because they didn't get to 100. Well, everybody else is celebrating because they didn't fail, right? And 80 is great when it comes to team performance. And at Intrepid Impact Team, we actually help companies get their teams from that average of 58, that average of 60, 65, well into the 80s. And part of that is using the 5 voices here, right? So we help them get to an 80. So to us, an 80 and 85, that's a celebration. Creatives have a tough time with that. And because of that, they might suck the joy and the life out of the team with being a little bit pessimistic or negative. Well, creatives, celebrate the 80. Celebrate all the little wins along the way. You got to celebrate those little victories because that's going to propel you to that next stage. And creatives, listen up. Celebrating the victories will propel you closer to that perfect vision you have in your head. So if you learn how to celebrate those victories, learn how to celebrate 65, 75, 85, 95. You're going to get closer to what you had in mind all along. And your team is going to be excited that you're finally happy. Because at the end of the day, any team member will tell you they probably spend half their day managing the boss's emotions, especially if you're an accidental leader. Another thing the accidental creative might do is disengage from the team by withdrawing because what? No one understands me anyway. So they'll internalize the development of the idea or solving that problem and choose not to invite others. Why? Because they don't understand. Well, here's what you got to do. Creative. You got to back up to the present. Now, we mentioned earlier in the show that the present tense voices make up 73% of the population. 73% of the population is trying to figure out how is this going to affect people or resources right now. So creatives, as a leader, think about how it affects people and resources right now, and you're going to get 75% of the buy-in or 73% of the buy-in. And invite others, because remember, you only speak 9% of the voice of the population. So it stands to reason that the other 91% would be valuable to you if you're going to reach that goal that's so perfect in your head. Last thing the accidental creative might do is withdrawing, they become increasingly critical of themselves. and become less available. You remember from the last show, I mentioned Howard Hughes. We all know he became a recluse. That's a great example of what a runaway train could be for an accidental creative. So that's just a recap of what the accidental creative can look like. But what does the intentional creative look like? The intentional creative. So what is an intentional creative? An intentional creative is someone who understands that only 9% of the population thinks and speaks the way they do. And when we say speak, we mean project information to the world. It could be an email, it could be a speech, it could be just a dialogue, it could be body language. Remember, creatives think and speak future, but most people don't. So if you're the creative, you really need to learn to celebrate the win, even if the result wasn't quite what you imagined, right? Because why? There's constraints. There's physical constraints. Let's say we ran out of land, or let's say the plot of land we built that building on wasn't big enough for the original plan. There's fiscal or financial constraints. Financial constraints means we have a budget, right? So we have to adhere to a budget. If we don't, we're going to run out of money, and you'll never realize that victory that you had. And remember, that 80% is great. That's great from 60. That's great from 65. So celebrate that. What's another intentional creative thinking about? Well, the intentional creative might understand that when team members critique your idea and ask for details, they're genuinely trying to help. Now, you might remember from the recap that there's a particular voice that gets the work done that asks lots of questions. That's the guardian. Now, if there's a guardian on your team, they represent 30% of the population creative. So creative, you need to let them ask their questions. Because at the end of the day, while you're off creating and thinking about the next idea, they're the ones that are actually going to get it done. So if you don't get through all those painful questions that you hadn't figured out yet and learn not to be so defensive, then it's not going to get done, because the guardians are the ones that get the work done. The nurturers are the ones that protect everybody and take care of everybody while the work's getting done. So you really need to tap into the people and the resources of the present tense and make sure that you've taken care of them. And the only way you can do that is to hear from those voices. That's the reason why the Intrepid Impact team, we say value in every voice. Again, Intrepid Impact team understands and teaches that there's value in every voice, because we know that there's 5 leadership voices and we're all a combination of all 5. So if we don't understand that the other voices are more important, or that are just as important as ours, then we're going to miss a huge portion of the puzzle, and we're never going to get where we want. So intentional creatives, make sure you sit through all those questions and then be prepared for them. In fact, if you really want to be an intentional leader, if you really want to pop that 80-90% of team morale or team effectiveness, take your idea to those present tense voices, the nurturers and the guardians, and say, hey, here's my idea, Swiss cheese it. Literally, punch it full of holes. Tons of holes. I want as many holes as possible. Then you can invite their ideas, but you can also take those questions, or those questions you didn't answer, and go back and fill in the gaps. And every single time you do that, every iteration makes your idea, or I should say y'all's idea together as a team, more of a reality and more possible every single day. Now, the next thing that you want to know as a creative is you can't play it safe. You can't worry about all those times that no one understood you and prevent you from coming up with new ideas. Because guess what? Most of your ideas aren't going to be good ones. And I don't say that because you're not good. I say that because not every idea is a good one, but it may lead to a good one. So don't be afraid to share your ideas. Don't play it safe. Give yourself permission to think outside the box. Hey, what if cars floated upside down? I mean, you're the creative, so you thought of it. So what if you said that in a meeting? People might look at you like you're crazy, unless Intrepid Impact Team has taught them the 5 voices. Little plug there for our company. But think about it. That statement might prompt someone else to have another idea or another complement to that. Said, hey, well, instead of upside down flying, let's fly right side up, right? So as you go through this idea process, you begin to create something that's actually going to be possible. You know, that was just a crazy example, but again, don't play it safe. Don't play it safe. And remember, it's okay to be wrong. It comes with the territory of creativity. Remember, not every idea is a good one, but that's not for you to decide. Throw it out there and see what happens. Because like I said, somebody else might have some good insight for you. And here's the other thing. Because you see the future, objects in the mirror are going to seem closer than they appear, right? Because you see the future, you're going to think things are an imminent threat or an imminent opportunity long before anyone else does. Now, that's great for a warning system, but it's not always as close to reality as you think it may be. So if you're leading a creative, recognize that they have valuable input, but also understand that what they see is typically future. So it could be next month, it could be next year, it could be 10 years, next decade. But as you lead that creative, or if you're a creative, just understand that most people need to ask lots of questions to understand what you're saying. So sit through the questions, be patient. And like I said before, financial realities are important. Good enough may have to be good enough sometimes. That doesn't mean you can't sell your dream as hard as you want and make it as big as you can, or keep adding on to it later. But remember, financial realities are true. They do exist, right? So when you have those constraints, those budgets, or even physical constraints, you have to keep that in mind. So if we have to play within a certain boundary, it might behoove you to figure out, hey, what's that boundary that I can create it? And remember, we want you to think outside the box, but if we only have $1 million to spend, hey, is there a way to get your $10 million idea down to 2? Maybe we can finance or raise capital for the other $1 million. Now we've got a $2 million idea that actually fits within our budget. Financial realities are important, and good enough may have to be good enough sometimes. And don't forget to celebrate. You know, we said that before. Don't forget to celebrate the win. People, and then generally speaking, people are not ignoring your ideas. If you feel ignored, it's because they didn't understand. So don't be afraid to say it again in a different way. You're creative, so you could probably think of another way to say it. It's truly hard for them to hear you. Only 9% of the population speaks creative as their most natural voice. So again, when you're thinking that you're not being heard, it's not necessarily you, it's the fact that they don't speak your language. So try to bring it into the present tense, say it a couple of times, ask for clarification. Hey, did you guys understand what I was saying? What questions do you have? Pull those questions out of them, especially if you're the leader, because if they haven't understood you, they're going to be afraid to ask questions because in the past, maybe you got defensive. I was actually told that by one of my team members. They said, Jerry, you know, when you have new ideas, and we don't like them, you kind of get defensive. That was when I first learned this about, I think probably 5 years ago now. So every day is a great learning opportunity for the creative, especially because remember, you think outside the box way better than anybody else. And remember this is the last piece. Remember this, you don't have to prove your worth to teammates. Relax and trust the unique contribution you bring. Now, if you were here on our last episode, you heard me talk in great detail about my oldest son, James, who's a first voice creative. And when he was younger, it was hard to understand what he was saying. He got in a lot of trouble, actually. But me being a communicator, I taught him to use his words. And over time, now I'm the recipient of tons of great stories from him, tons of great ideas. I take my business ideas to him. And think about how empowering that is to a 16-year-old when the business owner, business coach, dad is bringing you ideas and saying, hey, what do you think? You can do that every single day with the creative. So if you're leading a creative, bring your ideas to them and see what they think. Bring your thoughts and your concerns to them and see what they think. And if you are the creative, remember, only 9% of the population thinks and speaks the way you do. So keep in mind that you may have to explain things more than once. They're not stupid. They just are where the rubber meets the road. So they need to know how this affects people and resources right now. So again, folks, that's the creative voice. That's the deep dive into the second leadership voice. We're going to cover the other 3 in the next number of episodes here. But again, I'm Jerry Howard, your host. We're here at ESPN Richmond Radio every week, Mondays at 6:30 a.m. This is the Intrepid Impact Leadership Broadcast. And don't forget to check out our website, intrepid-impact.com. Intrepid-impact.com. And you can find us on all the social media handles as well. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'll see you next week.